Welcome, everyone. I'm Karen Gimnig. I am the Associate Director of the Cohousing Association of the United States. And that is the organization that is putting these on, and we'll remind you that we don't charge you anything to participate, and we're really glad you're here. There is a cost to the association to putting on events like that. And I'll get a link in the chat to our website where you could make a donation or sign on as what we're now calling an evergreen neighbor. A monthly donation of even a small amount is a huge help to us. So that just helps keep these kinds of programs running, along with the website and the directory and the other services that many of you find useful. And that helps spread cohousing, which in the end is what we're about. So welcome to everyone on behalf of the organization. Karen Hoskin is often with us. She's our executive director, and I believe she will be listening in by phone from the car. So I don't think we're going to hear from her, but she's with us in spirit. So our plan for tonight is Katie's going to talk to us for about half an hour or so, I think, is what you've got going. And then we'll have questions and answers, which can be in the chat. And I think that's all I need to tell you about logistics. So now I get to tell you that Katie McCamant is with us tonight. Katie, if you don't already know, which you probably do, has been working in cohousing for 30 years. She is the owner of Cohousing Solutions and helps communities get off the ground. She saves them from the very most expensive mistakes they're likely to make and guides them through the very complicated process of developing a piece of property into a cohousing community. So Katie is brilliant, beautiful, and fun in my experience. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks there, Karen. So what I'm going to do is share my screen. And so just try that. Give me a minute here to get that. And so I have a PowerPoint to share with you. Okay, great, great. Yes, so really a pleasure to be here with all of you today. As Karen mentioned, my background, I'm a licensed architect. I'm no longer practicing as an architect. I've been the developer that partners with co-housing groups and, acts, as a developer guaranteeing financing. And I've been a consultant and a project manager. So I've been really in the trenches building co-housing communities for all of the last 30 years. So out of that, you come up with a lot of opinions, and I'll share a few of those with you tonight. So Cohousing Solutions is a development consulting firm, and we work with cohousing groups all the way through the development process, helping them put their projects together in a number of different ways. But before I get into our topic tonight, I do want to give my own plug for the Cohousing Association, because I'm afraid I'll forget at the end. But as one of the founding board members of the Cohousing Association, and someone who goes back so far in cohousing that I remember the days when, if you wanted to find out about other cohousing communities in the area, you sent us a self-addressed stamped envelope, and we printed out the list of 6 cohousing communities in the country with their contact information and sent that back to you. So having the directory, having the website, putting on the conferences, organizing these web chats, I just feel it has been just such an important benefit for the cohousing movement. And I don't know if everybody knows, but there's nobody to support this organization except us, you and me, those of us interested in cohousing. So in my own cohousing community, Nevada City Cohousing, I make sure that we have in our annual HOA budget at least $500 every year that goes to the Cohousing Association. And I would really encourage all of you to get your own groups to support this association. And I know money's always tight within cohousing communities, but if we can't support the association, there's nobody else to do it. So join me in making sure we keep this organization alive. So our topic tonight is hiring professionals to get your community built. So what I want to cover tonight is, who do you need and in what order? What are the criteria for what you're looking for? Keys to a successful relationship with your professionals. And the co-housing question that comes up with every group: What does it mean? What about hiring from within your group and some of the issues around that? So let's start with, who do you need and what order? So, one of the things with co-housing communities is that there is no timeline for move-in until you have property. And so my focus in the work that I do with co-housing communities is really around the development process and how do you actually build a co-housing community. And so obviously, if you're doing a retrofit or if you're, or already exist in a community, there'd be a different set of consultants you wanted to hire. But so looking from that perspective, the question I always ask my client groups when they first hire me is, if there was a perfect property showed up next week, are you ready, right? Are you ready to act on it? Are you ready to raise the money to put in an offer to buy it? Do you know what you need to do? Do you have an architect? So that gives me a really clear way to kind of assess the situation in terms of, are they ready to go look for site search? So looking at it from that perspective, I think the first thing any co-housing group needs to do is to figure out how you're working together. How do you make decisions? What's your mode of operating? An increasing number of co-housing communities are using sociocracy today. Do you know how to use that? If you hit a tough decision, do you know how to work that through? How are your agendas set up? Where are you keeping copies of your minutes? Do you have committees? Do you have point people? So that if something starts to move, if you had a property to move forward on, are you ready to move that? Do you know how to make decisions as a community? So that's why I put process first. And, I think we're blessed in co-housing communities in that there's a lot of our members have great process skills, but there's also a set of co-housing process consultants out there that work with co-housing communities. And I would urge you to bring them in to help you get a strong start and to get that piece of your group in order in terms of how do you work together. So then the next question is, if you go out and look at properties, who's running your budgets? Who's helping you with feasibility? How do you know if this is a viable property to build on? And what I find is fairly typical in most co-housing groups is that you have a lot of smart people who have done well in their own careers, generally come from a broad spectrum. But it's actually pretty unusual to have anybody in a startup group that really understands real estate development or has ever developed a 25-unit development of any sort. So that's where I think you really need, as you start to look for property, is who's helping you put together those preliminary budgets, who's guiding you as you talk to the zoning department, who's helping you assess the feasibility and find the other consultants you need. So that is generally either a development consultant or a developer as your next number two. So a developer, I work as a development consultant in that I'm not taking the same level of risk as a development partner. And co-housing solutions is often the first consultant groups hire. And I think our background, and my background in particular, gives us a unique advantage in that because I've worked in all aspects of co-housing development. So I can work with you on your membership processes, on marketing, on site search, on budgets, and understanding all of that. But that's unusual for someone to have that kind of background. Developers are a little bit trickier because the reality is that there's a very, very limited number of co-housing developers in the country that have ever done a co-housing project before. And so when you're talking to developers that you might partner with in your region, it's more likely that you'd be talking to somebody who understands real estate development, but doesn't understand co-housing and what it feels like to be part of an early stage co-housing group. So what I find with developers, and I am a believer, I think that you can do a really great partnership between a professional developer and a co-housing group. about half of the communities across the country have come out of a partnership with a developer. But what I find is if co-housing groups go out and talk to their local developers, that if they find a developer who's intrigued with the concept, they may be glad to have coffee with them, to talk with them. And at the end of that meeting, they'll say, wow, what a nice group of people. Hey, feel free to call me anytime. I'm glad to talk to you. But the developer does not see a business model that they feel understand how they can partner with that group. And so understanding how to work with the developer and how to put together a business model that they see how they can do more than have coffee with you and give you advice, actually partner with you is a real key. So actually the advice that I give my clients is, please don't talk to local developers. Let me talk to them. And because I can explain to them a business model that gets them thinking more about partnering with you and not just offering advice. But again, really the question in early stage groups is who's helping you to figure out if any given property is really a viable property for you, and what is it really going to cost? What's a reasonable target prices for us to aim for if we build housing on that site? So that's, you know, one of those early consultants. It's somebody, you want someone on your team to help assist you with that, who's done development before, who understands development, not something, anybody can put together a spreadsheet, but someone who's really been out there in the hard knocks of development and understands the kinds of things, the questions that you probably wouldn't even think to ask if you hadn't been before. So then the next one is an attorney. Attorneys are, you know, because if you find land, you're going to want to put an offer on your agreements, your limited liability companies. So in order to move forward, you need someone to help you with the legal stuff. And I think with attorneys, the key is someone who really understands real estate and investment in real estate. That's actually the trickiest side of it, is the security sides of having members investing, members and supporters, if you can get them, investing in a real estate deal and how to put those pieces together. I think with attorneys, the mistake that groups make is thinking that the best deal is the best hourly rate. And it, you know, sometimes you can pay a lower hourly rate and end up costing you a lot more. So with an attorney, what you're really looking for is who's got the experience so that they are not learning on your dime, but are applying their experience and helping you put that together. And I would say the other thing I find with attorneys is it's just really important that they don't need to want to live in co-housing, but they got to believe in it. And I've run into that and had a couple of groups, you know, get really frustrated because they were working with attorneys who just thought what they were trying to do was crazy. And so they spend a lot of time telling them all about the risk and why they shouldn't be doing that instead of helping to solve problems. Now, I've added marketing and sales here. And I think traditionally we have really seen the marketing co-housing as what groups do. And what I am seeing, the more I'm out there, the more groups I look at it, is while co-housing community members are enthusiastic believers in the co-housing model, they aren't necessarily good at marketing, and particularly the sales, the follow-up of actually getting people beyond, oh, what an interesting concept, to joining your community and putting money in the deal. So I think there's a very limited number of consultants out there that understand marketing and sales for co-housing, but I would really encourage your group to reach out to them, find out what they offer, and see if there's somebody you want to work with, so that the money, the time and effort you put in from the very beginning is as effective as possible. I think it's particularly important because marketing and sales is a big burnout for co-housing groups. And so, you know, you want to be as effective as possible in your effort, both of time and money, to find your future members. And I'm very excited. I think we'll have a number of good sessions on this at the conference. I feel like it's something that we're starting to really build a lot more experience with in the co-housing world and take more seriously. I really see that as your list to get a project off the ground. At some point, you need, civil engineers, structural engineers, mechanical engineers. Those will come through your architect in that they will, they'll guide you. They have people they know how to put out proposals and solicit proposals there. So, I think that will follow. The general contractor, way down the line. You don't need a general contractor initially, and, eventually, absolutely. So if you can get this first team together of the ones I've already talked about, they can help you find the other consultants you'll need for a development project. Now, the one thing that is difficult to cover is the actual process for soliciting fees, getting into agreement, getting into contract with these different professionals. Because each one of them is a different process. And how you go about finding the right people really varies depending on where you are and what your local market conditions are. So just as an example, architects and engineers are used to putting out proposals, fee proposals based on very little information because they're the designers, so you need them on board to design. So in that world, architects and engineers are used to putting together fee proposals with the basic information at the beginning of a project before there's a design. On the other hand, a developer is very much a time and place question. So you could talk to a developer who might be really interested this year, but 2 years from now, when you finally find a site, has got too much going on to take on a new project. So I would look for an appropriate developer in a very different way than I would look for an architect. And so that, again, is having somebody early on who understands the context in which you're working, and which also changes with the market, right? So as an example, general contractors. Right now, we're in a boom economy. Any decent contractor is very busy right now. So you don't want to try to do a competitive bid between 3 general contractors. You want to do a negotiated bid and decide on your contractor a year in advance of starting construction, and then work toward them and towards construction and getting the cost down. So that's something that's dictated by the economy that we are working in now. It might be in a different economy, you might take a different approach. So again, having someone on your team that understands the development context in which you're working and what's the right way to go to find your people, I think can be very helpful. So what are the criteria? What are you looking for? Well, you're really looking at people's background and experience. And I would say with most of your consultants, what you're looking for on the development side is people who have experience in housing, not building houses, but building housing and building projects of this size and type. So if you're in an urban market, you want, if you're looking for a developer, you're looking for an architect, you're looking for engineers, you need someone who is out there building urban housing now, designing urban housing now. So I know that the architect or the developer who's done this really nifty 3 townhouse super green project is not gone through a 25-unit project is going to be learning on your dime. And my experience is that most co-housing groups really can't afford to be somebody's research and development project, because what you're hiring is their experience. So, look at the project type that you're looking at and find professionals who understand that type of project, that size of project. I know I've managed a lot of construction projects. I never want to be a general contractor's largest projects ever again. I have made that mistake too many times, and it's not worth it. It's simply not worth it. one of the questions that comes up is, well, what about co-housing experience? And that certainly is important if you can find it. You know, a lot of these cases, finding an attorney in your state that has co-housing experience may be quite impossible, simply because there isn't that much co-housing built still. So it really depends where you are, what makes sense. I think the really unique thing about the professionals who work with co-housing is they understand how to work with a co-housing group, and they, excuse me, have a more realistic assessment about what you can do and where you are at any given stage. So I think particularly when you're talking to architects and developers, you may not find an architect that has co-housing experience. Then you really want to make sure they have the housing experience in your region. But what you want to make sure is there's someone on your team that is bringing in the co-housing experience one way or another. Because there's really no reason why you would want to reinvent the wheel. I mean, I don't know. I guess some groups do. I have found that co-housers really do seem to want to reinvent the wheel more often than I do. So that, but I think, you know, it's not that you have to absolutely have a co-housing architect. But there's a small list of co-housing architects out there who have been really studying co-housing for years. And so they've learned a lot from that, you know. So if you're hiring an architect that has perhaps real strengths locally, how are you going to bring that other aspect in to learn from, you know, what we've learned over the last 30 years? So those are the kinds of questions you're asking yourself when you're looking at the criteria. I would say what I see as the most common mistake co-housing groups make is they get really intrigued with people who have done small, very green projects, but don't have the experience of the scale that you're looking at. And I think that's an expensive lesson to work with professionals that may have done great small projects, but haven't done the project size you're doing. And understanding how things change with that. So, and then the other thing is just, you know, can you afford them and can they afford you, right? So the reality is nobody works in co-housing for the money, right? I mean, anybody who's got the smarts and the experience to work with a co-housing group and provide good services there, I can guarantee could make more money doing something else. But they need to earn a living, right? And so people are trying to put their kids through college, pay their payments on the mortgage, all of that. So you get what you pay for. And I think one of the mistakes I see with co-housing groups is thinking they're getting a deal from somebody's discounted or too low fees. And eventually that'll come back and haunt the project. On the other hand, you want to get as much clarity as you can right up front about the expectation of fees and cost. So even with an attorney, which never gives you flat fees and always says, well, it depends on how much time, you know, back and forth there is, you can still ask them, so what would you expect this would take, you know, to get our limited liability company together? You know, what should we be budgeting for that? When we do our homeowners association documents, you know, you may not be able to give us a flat fee, but what should we be budgeting for that? So you can get a sense of their expectation. So, because I can tell you, there certainly are professionals out there I would love to work with, but my projects can't afford them and my buyers can't afford them. So that may not be an option there, right? So getting clear about fees is early and often. So let's talk a little bit here about some of the keys to a successful relationship with your professionals. And this is all the way through the project, from the very beginning through the end. Number one is making sure that there is a single contact person from your group. That doesn't mean that you can't have Zoom calls with a broader committee on them or meetings with the whole group. but you want to make sure there is one contact person that is aligned with that professional. So as they have questions and as you have questions, things are going through that contact person. This would be particularly important with attorneys, but it's true with all professionals. If as a professional, I start hearing from different members of the group, I figure it's my job to respond to them. And all of a sudden, you could be really surprised by the invoices that show up. If different members of the community are contacting me with different questions, I'm just trying to, make sure they get the answers they need. And you may not be aware that all these other members have also contacted me. So that's, having a single contact person and organizing yourselves is really critical. And I think that's important that you explain that to the professionals you're working with when you're asking for fees, because that's one of the things that worries them is, do you understand how to discipline the project? Make sure all agreements about fees are in writing. The realm of misunderstandings, misinterpretations is huge if it's not in writing. So that is, I know sometimes people think that they can get a great deal by never sort of talking about the fees, but I don't think that serves you at all. So get clear about the fees, what would be additional services, what's included in the fee, how do they bill? Those are all very valid questions, and you should ask them and try to understand. And the other thing is being really clear about your priorities. Because I was just on a call with a developer and a co-housing group, and the developer said, well, we took those windows out because you were telling us that you're really concerned about affordability, but now you're coming in and you want to know about permeable paving and geothermal heating, and which way do you want to go here? Right? And that would be the classic co-housing approach, is that we want it cheaper and we want all this stuff. Well, what that tells your professionals is you have no idea what you want. So get clear about your priorities and communicate them consistently. And that means that you also have to remind your community members that, right? Though we decided on these set of priorities. So if we're really driving on affordability, we're asking our professionals how to get there, not telling them we want affordability and all these other things. So strive for consistency. So if you're changing your mind every month you talk to your professionals, your fees are going through the roof. And they stop taking you seriously, right? So you need to make decisions, move forward with them, be consistent in your communication and the people, how you communicate. Keep your consultants paid. This is actually something co-housing groups are pretty good at, much better than developers, I must say. So, but again, for every consultant out there, we all have issues around cash flow. And so if I've done the work, I need my invoices to be paid. And a typical consultant expects to be paid within 30 days of their getting their invoice. You don't have to drop everything the day the invoice shows up, but you do need to make sure that you have a process for approving and getting invoices paid so they don't get lost out there amongst your members. When your consultant reaches out to you and says, hey, I was thinking we should set up a meeting for next Tuesday, what about 2:30? Or I haven't heard from you recently, what's going on? Or I haven't heard back from that. Don't just go silent, right? So co-housing groups kind of get this thing where I need to talk to somebody before I respond. What I really need is like, a quick email. Got your question. I'd like to check in with the development committee on that before I respond to you. I'll get back to you next week. Some acknowledgement that you've gotten my email, it's in process, fine. But just something that, that I know you've gotten it, I know where it is. So the other thing I think is just to understand that you really do get what you pay for. This is not to say you should hire really expensive consultants. But if you think you're going to get a deal with a graduate student just out of architecture school, I think, you're going to pay for it in construction cost. And I see this happens a lot with professionals, that they're very excited about working on, a project that really has a focus of sustainability. But by the time you get to construction documents, they've run out of fee. And they're just, trying to keep their office alive. And so it does not serve your project for any of your consultants to be losing money on you, right? That's, I think, an understanding people don't really quite get. You want a contractor losing money is a big problem, right? An architect losing money is a problem. So you want to be efficient so that they can also be efficient and make money on you. That's the goal. That's why they're professionals. This is how they pay the rent. So they need to be efficient on their end in order to do that. I think all questions are valid, and I think that you can ask your consultants any questions at all. The only problem is when they start being repeated questions, right, from new members or people who didn't make that call, and then it's just wasting time. But you should never feel like you can't ask your consultants any question at all. And in fact, I think one of the most valuable things you can do with your consultants is to say, this is what we're trying to do, and we really believe in this vision, but we don't understand real estate development. So we need you to share your experience and actually give them permission to serve you with that. Ask your consultants, ask your architects, your engineers, your developers, your contractor to tell you how to meet that budget. Don't question them or their authority. They have a lot of experience. They may not get it right on everything, but draw on their experience. And so I think that sort of acknowledging and treating people with respect and asking them to give you the best they can is how you'll get it. Nobody wants to be the bad guy. Nobody wants to be the person out there who says, oh, that's a great idea, but I don't see that anywhere in your budget. So unless you can tell me you can afford it, I don't know why I would design it that way, right? You need consultants who are willing to do that. And so just sort of putting yourself in their position, and, consultants, we want our clients to be happy, but you'll get better information out of them. If you ask them to be honest, to share the best experience they have, and to help you avoid problems down the line, not just make you happy now. And this other one, treating people with respect. I've been working with co-housing groups for 30 years. You would not believe the things people have said to me. We're all out there hardworking folks. And I do get the sense that there are a lot of co-housers who have just never worked with consultants before. But you'll get the best out of me if you appreciate the work I give you, if you're consistent, if you respond, and you appreciate me, right? That doesn't mean you can't also ask really tough questions. But if I feel appreciated for what I'm doing, I'm going to give you the best I can. If you disrespect everything I say, it's like, oh, well, do whatever. That's your problem. So all of those things really affect what you can get out of your consultants. And don't hold back from, celebrating with them. I have to say, I've never gotten a tip in my life. I used to, as a project manager, make sure the architect got flowers when the drawings went into the building department or some other key milestone. And those are the kinds of things that co-housing groups are really lousy at. It's like, wow, you worked really hard. We got to this thing. It'd be really nice to be acknowledged around that. And what that will buy you in payback and extra effort is over tenfold. So one of the questions that always comes up with co-housing groups is, what about hiring from within our group? And if you are blessed to have professionals that can provide real services to your community, I often think that actually you may very well get the best value from a professional that is part of your community and can provide professional services. But don't do that without really thinking it through. And so, is this a professional who really has the experience we need? Or are they really nice? They've been coming to our meetings and I really like them a lot, but they've never done anything, that's of this scale. Because that kind of professional can serve the group best by being on the legal team talking to an attorney, or by being on the design team in court working with the architect, because they do understand the context they're working in, but they may not have the experience. So you want to be really, I think the key thing from hiring within a group is to make don't just fall into it. Step back, make a really conscious decision. What are the other alternatives? Have we looked hard enough at those? Do we need to solicit other proposals? Do we really think this is the best choice for the group? And what if we get in a disagreement? Can we, how are we going to get torn because they're both a member of the group and a professional? And then if you are hiring someone within the group, work like professionals, that you have agreements in writing, that you're clear about if there's a conflict of interest, and that you're very clear about which hat that person is wearing when they're speaking. So as someone who has been both an architect and a developer in projects that I ended up living in, one of the things I thought was very important, in addition to having all the agreements in writing, was that the group could always ask me to leave the room, that the group could make decisions without me in the room, and that I, in my own way of sort of how to work on that, I was first a professional with the goal of moving into the community. But during the development process, my interaction with the group was more as a professional than as a community member, which meant that I had to leave decisions to the community. I could offer them my recommendation and advice as a professional, and then step back and trust the group process for them to make the right decision for the community. So there's a quick overview of hiring professionals, and love to hear questions and comments now. So the scope of work, unless you've been in development, I'm guessing that your group probably doesn't know how to put together a scope of work for most of these professionals. So, I mean, that's the first question. But you can't get realistic fee proposals without a clear scope of work. So I think that's one of the places a development consultant could help you, is to help, what is the scope of work we're asking for? Or the other option, another way to approach it, is to ask the professional, we're trying to build a 25-unit co-housing community. Here's the basic pieces of it. What do we need from you, right? And so just as an example, with civil engineers, I want them to call the town. I want them to have the conversation about what the expectations for the town are regarding as-built drawings, or what exactly that process is for approval of your site work drawings. And then to give me the scope based on that. So, so you can't get fees without a defined scope, that's for sure. So I think it's not necessarily a robust scope of work, but an outline. And you can involve your professionals in that, especially if you're talking to them and they don't, they can help you define the scope of work. And by just asking them, well, what do you think we need here, and how would you define it? That being said, I would never start a design process with the architects without a fee schedule already negotiated. Yes, good question. I think that's something that people don't really appreciate, is that homeowners associations have a terrible reputation out there, and they do sue way more than any other project type. And so that means that your architects need to have additional insurance, engineers need additional insurance, and contractors need additional insurance as well. And so you are not going to get, the guy who does the deal on a single family house because he doesn't have the insurance to work for an HOA. So a community, whether you're talking about, especially for repairs later after you're living there, is your community really needs to make a decision about whether you want to pay more and have contractors that have the insurance to work with an HOA, or whether you want the risk of uninsured workers on your site. There is a world out there that works with HOAs. And yes, they're more expensive, and there is a cost to this litigiousness. And the problem is you may not have sued, but somebody else did, and so we all pay that cost. But I think that's what is the really, it's really the insurance and liability issues, and finding the contractors that carry the insurance in order to work with HOAs, and realizing that it's going to be a different cost than if you're hiring them to work on your individual private house. So that's, I think every community goes through that. Is trying to find. On that, let me say one other thing about, and this is particularly after move-in. I think it can really serve a community to have a short list of contractors that you work with regularly. So my own community is going on 14 years, and I'm quite familiar with these issues because we've been hitting them as well. And so if we need someone to work, rather than going out and getting 3 bids for every little repair job, we will be much better by developing a relationship with a contractor who we trust and build up time over, build up a relationship over time. And so if we can find a contractor we'd like, go back to them. Don't feel like you got to go out for 3 bids for everything, because what that does is it just chases them away. It's not worth it. So building those relationships with professionals that you need over and over again, and honoring those relationships, because in the long run, you'll get better prices from them because you're a repeat customer. And they'll show up for you in an emergency because you're a repeat customer. Whereas if you're jumping all over the map, and this has been an issue in all sorts of ways with co-housing groups, is we kind of jump around and aren't, as co-housers are not very loyal. So they're not repeat customers, and we don't get the benefit of that. Yes, but they're probably not co-developing the property unless they are developers. They might work with you. What property owners are most likely to give you is time instead of, so my experience, having done a lot of site search and property deals, is when push comes to shove, hardly anybody ever gives you below market rate on property. But if you can find a property owner that's intrigued with the concept, what you can get and what you're really looking for is time for you to organize your group. So you don't have to buy it, within the first 90 days or 120 days, and the way the crazy market is right now. But that you could actually put down some money, get into contract, make sure you're in contract in writing, and not actually buy the property until you get to the start of construction. And there are a few communities who have really had a great assistance from their property owners, because their property owners got excited about the concept of co-housing being built on their property, and were willing to give the groups time to get organized. So they didn't have to come up with all the money to buy the property as quickly. So yeah, I mean, if you can't afford it, it doesn't matter how green it is, right? So I think, so first of all, in my experience, co-housing is always a higher cost per square foot. It's the basic arithmetic of common areas in a small custom neighborhood. So the arithmetic leads you to a higher cost per square foot than other comparables out there in the housing market. And that's the reason that most non-co-housing developers are building big houses, because it lowers the cost per square foot. So there's a basic arithmetic that is inherent in a co-housing budget that leads to a higher cost per square foot. But you're talking about, in that case, what every co-housing group wants. I want a better priced home that's really super green. And you got to make the hard decisions. So you got to decide which rates. And for most of us, being able to afford what we create at the end is the driving force, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. And so you've got to get really clear where, what is the max people are able to afford as a community that's realistic. And then you may not get every little bell and whistle you've always wanted. But I think one of the things that's really important to keep in mind is by living in community, that has such an overwhelming difference in our impact on the planet, that it matters much less than any specific heating system or solar panels. And really look at what you can do later. Every co-housing community would love to move in with solar panels. Most co-housing communities add them later when they can afford them, because they couldn't afford them when they first moved in. So, I think that's a classic for all communities. My experience is budget drives that you can, if you can't afford to move in, then why bother, right? So you've got to sort of get real about that. And your developer can't help you if you're not clear about your priorities. If they're getting a mixed message, they're just going to throw up their hands and say, oh, a bunch of confused people here, I don't know what to do. So. I work internationally. I have, right now I'm working with a group in Calgary, Canada, and all across the country, yes. Yes, it definitely is helpful. And I think that's something that local professionals are very helpful. I'm very aware that that's one thing that if I'm working out of the difference between I work in my region and I work across the country is I don't have a base of local professionals that I can call up and say, hey, what do you think about this? Or have you ever heard about that? Or what about this? Which I have in the Northern California region. So yes, I think it can be very helpful to have, anybody within, if you've been in a career for, 20, 30 years, whatever your career is, you build up a bunch of relationships around that. And so in design, in development, in the legal world, all of those people do also. And I think we don't value enough that there is real value there. And so just, working in Northern California, I have attorneys I've worked with for literally 30 years. I can cut my legal cost so much lower here because, we're working off past experience and we have a relationship there, right? And I can connect, I can take all of those ideas and templates to other parts of the country, but ultimately we need an attorney in that state, right? But again, I think valuing those professional relationships, it does bring real value. The other thing I'm going to take the moment to mention here, and again, if any of you who've worked as consultants or, you can appreciate this, that, when you're working as a consultant or as a contractor, there's the project I'm working on now, and then there's the projects that I need to be bringing in to support myself next year. And one of the real downsides of co-housing projects is you're not repeat customers. And so for all of your consultants, the likelihood that you are bringing me another project is almost nil. So that is one of the, just something to figure in your calculating. So if your professionals are repeat producers, so in Northern California, I've taken a whole slew of co-housing communities to a group of professionals I've worked with in many, many projects now. So they don't see the co-housing group as the repeat customer, but they see me as the repeat customer. This is particularly true when you're talking to contractors and to banks. you know, the effort to begin a new relationship is much greater than someone you're working with that you worked with in another project before. So as a co-housing group, that's something to think about, is who's the repeat customer? What are the relationships they bring? And that, you know, so as an example, I think one of the most valuable things a general contractor brings is their relationship with subcontractors in the region. It is not just that they know the work of those subcontractors, but it is that they could bring potential future work to those subcontractors. And so what is getting the plumbing sub to show up and fix that warranty question on the project, issue on the project, is not the co-housing group. It's the contractor who is promising that sub future work if they can get this problem taken care of now. So that brings real value also. Well, you can sue, and I would really, really question whether that's worth it, because that can really be a black hole. So I would suggest you talk to an attorney. Sometimes just a threatening letter will get them to show up. But the other thing is just, and you may very well, have you, been persistent in following up. I'm always surprised that people think that one phone call gets someone to call back. So I find, I get the best turnout when I'm really persistent, not just email, but email and phone calls. And I'm the nicest squeaky wheel they've got. So I won't go away, but I'm also not angry. I'm trying to work with them. So, but an issue like that, if you feel like you've done everything possible, you've reached out, you've called, you've followed up, and you're just not getting a response, then I think I would be worth talking to your attorney, having them look at your contract, your agreement with that, and then making a hard decision about, is it worth pursuing it in a legal way? And I think there's a lot of times it's not worth it. You may be right. It can be an expensive thing to try to prove. So just before you go down that hole, I would try all your other options. But you can call your contractors association. You can report them to the Better Business Bureau. All of that shows up, particularly with contractors is the realm where that stuff does make a difference. So that would be the other things you could do. Oh yes, so it is really going to be fun. I'm going to be there in spades. And I just, I encourage as many members of your groups to get there, because, I think what's really helpful for co-housing communities is they're bringing up their whole membership with information. When you send one person, then they're supposed to come back and convey this overwhelming amount of information they got. So I find it's much more effective with co-housing groups if you get a bunch of members to go. You can divide up different sessions, and then you can bring all of that back to your group. And it's really fun. So, and Portland's a great place. There's a lot to see. There's quite a few different kinds of communities there. So it's really worth the visit there, to both visit other co-housing communities and learn from other people like yourselves and the groups that are ahead of you, as well as the professionals. So, looking forward to it. Thanks for having me, and hope everybody has a lovely evening. See you at the conference.